Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Iran downplays Hormuz threat amid fears of a military confrontation. Battle looms in Yemeni town captured by al-Qaeda. And violence continues in Syria as Arab League's mission mandate expires. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
من جانبه حذر وزير الخارجية الإيراني علي أكبر صالحي
Iranian Foreign Minister Ali Akbar Salehi has warned regional countries against being, quote, dragged into a dangerous position. Salehi, who is currently visiting Turkey, said that Iran has never tried to close the Strait of Hormuz, through which a large portion of the world's oil exports pass. He further said that Tehran threatened to close the strait if Western sanctions banning its oil exports are tightened, and said his country wants stability in the region.
تريد الاستقرار في المنطقة. وفي واشنطن قال جاي كارني المتحدث باسم البيت الأبيض.
In Washington, White House spokesman Jay Carney said that Iran still has a way out of the growing confrontation over its nuclear program, adding that Tehran must discuss its nuclear activities with the world's leading powers. However, he didn't confirm reports that President Obama wrote to Iranian leaders expressing a readiness to talk, as confirmed by Iranian officials. Meanwhile, EU countries are moving ahead to impose additional sanctions on Iran, which may include Iran's central bank amid opposition from Russia and China.
The war of words between Western powers and Iran over the anticipated additional sanctions is raging on a slow fire. In light of the escalating rhetoric, Washington is adopting conflicting approaches. On one side, they threatened Iran in the Secretary of Defense's statement regarding the Iranian threat to close the Strait of Hormuz. And on the other, the U.S. is offering Iran a way out of the growing confrontation over its nuclear program by inviting Iran to discuss its nuclear activities with the world's leading powers. The invitation is raising questions, especially considering the puzzling letter that Obama reportedly sent to Iranian leaders, expressing his willingness to negotiate, as confirmed by Iranian officials. While Washington declined to comment on the issue, the letter seems to support the statement issued by the Iranian foreign minister during his visit to Turkey. The Iranian diplomat confirmed that negotiations are underway to resume the six-way nuclear talks. The Europeans are calling for unconditional talks. Russia has clearly rejected the sanctions and pushed for negotiations, and Beijing shared a similar position.
We believe this situation will not help resolve the Iranian problem, and we are concerned about it. We believe that resolving the issue must be achieved through dialogue and negotiations. Resorting to sanctions, pressure, and threats will lead to a further deterioration of the situation.
عبر اتفاقها من حيث المبدأ على تجميد أصول البنك المركزي الإيراني القناة الرئيسية.
A deterioration that the European countries may not agree with as they continue to push for tightened sanctions against Tehran. The EU states have agreed in principle to freeze the assets of the Iranian central bank, which is the main channel for Iranian oil revenues. They also agreed to ban Iranian oil exports, but they have yet to agree on how to protect the non-oil trade from sanctions. The dependence of European economies on Iranian trade, which includes importing 30% of Iran's oil, varies from one European country to another. The sanctions may have a stronger effect if other countries such as India, Japan, South Africa, and South Korea are included. This explains the recent visits by American officials to these countries, in what seems to be a campaign to besiege Iran and assure its oil importing partners by offering them other alternatives. On one side, there is a nuclear program, oil, and a strait, as well as new European sanctions to dry up Iran's sources of wealth. And on the other side, there are six-way international talks over the Iranian nuclear program, talks that hinge on the anticipated visit of IAEA inspectors, due to arrive in Tehran at the end of the month.
The Yemeni city of Rada fears turning into a battlefield between al-Qaeda and the Yemeni army as the organization's members confirm they will fight for the establishment of an Islamic caliphate.
For the seventh consecutive day, residents of the city of Rada in al-Bayda province, located southeast of the Yemeni capital, are in a state of panic. They fear looming confrontations between al-Qaeda members and the army forces that came to the region. This comes as one of those gunmen claimed leadership of the group and declared an Islamic caliphate in Yemen.
We call on the Islamic nation to unite and be patient. The Prophet, God's praise and peace be upon him, said, "The victorious were patient for an hour. It is only an hour, so be patient, persevere and be vigilant." The Islamic Caliphate is coming, with permission from God, and it will be established, even if we have to sacrifice our own skulls, our money, our children and our homes. Do not be sorrowful, for you are the highest, O Muslims. The victory of God is near. The victory of God is near, so be happy for these conquests. By God, these conquests will liberate the island of Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him.
And while the sheikhs of al-Bayda and the residents of Rad'a accuse security authorities in the province of involvement with the gunmen with the aim of repeating the Zinjibar scenario in Abin province, military leaders in the province say they will defend it until their last drop of blood. Meanwhile, Western media point to British involvement with the aim of repeating the scenario of Afghanistan and Pakistan, since Britain has historically funded fundamentalist groups and movements, leading its capital to be dubbed Londonistan.
هدد محافظ العاصمة العراقية بغداد بقتل أي أجنبي يحمل سلاحا في شوارع.
The governor of the Iraqi capital, Baghdad, threatened to kill any foreigner carrying weapons on the streets of the capital after 4 armed Americans linked to the U.S. embassy were arrested. Governor Salah Abdul Razak said his government will no longer allow armed foreigners to roam the neighborhoods and streets of the capital without the approval of the local government or without being accompanied by embassy police.
After
4 armed Americans were arrested near Governor Salah Abdul Razak's home in Baghdad on January 12, talks about the movement of armed Americans carrying out unknown tasks in Iraqi regions were renewed. The planned incident is indicative of the intelligence role the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad is playing to maintain U.S. influence after the withdrawal of occupation forces from the country, as confirmed by observers. This led Baghdad's governor to threaten to kill any foreigner carrying weapons on the streets of the capital. The 4 armed Americans who were arrested were later found to be affiliated with the American embassy. Abdul Razak said his government will no longer allow armed foreigners to roam the streets and regions of the capital without the approval of the local government or without being accompanied by embassy police.
وأكد عبد الرزاق أن تجوال مسلحين أجانب في مناطق سكنية يشكل خرقا أمنيا.
Abdul Razak confirmed that armed foreigners roaming residential areas is a security breach that must be dealt with, and stressed the need for embassy police to accompany all foreign diplomats to prevent any future problems or security breaches.
أمنية مستقبلا. والحادث هو ليس الأول من نوعه فقد قام أمريكيون بزي.
The incident is not unprecedented. Armed Americans in civilian clothing set up a fictitious checkpoint on al-Shumari Road south of Baghdad. They searched the vehicles of several Iraqi citizens.
المواطنين العراقيين. وكان مكتب رئيس الوزراء نور المالكي قد أصدر إنذارا لجميع.
The Office of Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki issued a warning to all security firms, notably those working in the Green Zone's embassies, to leave the country within 10 days. This series of actions seems somewhat linked to the simultaneous increase in the number of visitors to the US Embassy by the leadership of the al-Iraqiyya list.
تبدو مترابطة في بعض أجزائها إذ يعتبر مراقبون أن ما جرى من.
Observers say these embassy-related events aim to counter the Iraqi government's attempts to attain sovereignty and independence and put an end to the influence of foreign powers in the country.
نبدأ من سوريا حيث أفاد المرصد السوري لحقوق الإنسان أن 9 نشطاء.
The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported that 9 activists were killed by the gunfire of security forces in an ambush in the northwestern area of the country. As for security operations in other parts of Syria, the observatory added that 2 civilians were killed in the city of Homs, as well as 2 people in the city of Hama, and 1 person in a protest demanding the downfall of President Bashar al-Assad's regime. Yesterday's death toll has risen to around 20 people who were killed by the gunfire of security forces in Syria, according to a statement by the Syrian Revolution General Commission.
The neighborhoods of Bayada, Dir Balba, Al Kusur, and Bab al Gur in Homs experienced strong shelling and heavy gunfire by military forces, while reinforcements intensified in other neighborhoods. According to activists, the city of Talbisa in the province also experienced shelling by the military and security forces that wounded a number of residents. As for the Zabadani region in the countryside of Damascus, it is still witnessing violent shelling and a harsh siege, forcing many residents to flee.
They are shelling day and night. Where are we and our children supposed to go? We're forced to flee our home. God sent these people to host us in their homes. They gave us and our children shelter.
The Free Syrian Army carried out a number of operations that were described as massive in Zabadani. Its members began patrolling the streets of the region as if they had liberated the areas. In an interview with the BBC, Deputy Commander of the Free Syrian Army, Malik al-Kurdi, confirmed that a ceasefire deal was made with the Syrian forces in the region, which has been shelled for 5 days.
There was coordination between the Zabadani elders and the intelligence body for a ceasefire. In fact, a ceasefire agreement was reached a while ago, and they withdrew their damaged tanks. But then they resumed opening fire on the Syrian Free Army, and so the ceasefire only lasted several minutes.
The region of Idlib witnessed violent artillery shelling as clashes erupted between the regime's army and groups of defectors in the town of Takarim, leading to casualties on both sides. This occurred after 4 protesters were wounded by the gunfire of Syrian security forces in the town. The region of Jabal al-Zawiya was also shelled by rockets, according to activists, who said military forces killed a civilian after detaining him in a military checkpoint in Idlib area. The city of Marat al-Naman in the province was stormed after a group of defectors destroyed an armored truck belonging to the military. Meanwhile, protests continue in a number of Syrian regions as tensions continue to escalate in other parts of the country. In the city of Aleppo, the security presence was intensively reinforced in order to prevent protests that have become an almost daily occurrence at the university. In turn, Syrian authorities allowed some media networks to film the release of detainees as instructed by President Bashar al-Assad. However, the Syrian Revolution General Commission said several of those released were arrested immediately after leaving the prison. According to the opposition, the deployment of security forces in villages and provinces that the Arab delegation visited became a regular practice in order to prevent residents from approaching and reporting to the delegation. The delegation's visit to Syria is scheduled to end on Thursday, and the team will return to Cairo to submit its report. Hayan Yaqub, BBC.
On the
diplomatic front, in the framework of the Arab League's effort to find a solution to the Syrian crisis, Deputy Secretary General of the Arab League, Ahmed Ben Haley, said the chief of the Arab Observer team to Syria will submit a report on the team's mission. The Arab Observer delegation is facing increasing criticism from a number of parties. Ben Haley added that the report will be evaluated and shown to an Arab League committee on Saturday.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has hailed the age-old ties between the Jewish people and Holland. Speaking last night from the historic 17th century Portuguese synagogue, Netanyahu also praised his host for standing strong against Iran. IBA's Eli Walgalanter has more.
Security was tight around the 17th century Portuguese synagogue in Amsterdam's Old Jewish Quarter. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife Sarah paid tribute last night to the Dutch government, which Netanyahu said supported Israel's stance for tough sanctions against Iran.
It's good to know that the government of this country, where the International Criminal Court sits in judgment, they know who the real war criminals are. They're the leaders of Iran who call for a new Holocaust and who vow to wipe Israel off the map. The real war criminals are the terrorists of Hezbollah and Hamas, who fire rockets at civilians and who place their weapons right near schools and hospitals to use innocent people as human shields. These are the real war criminals. And in Holland, there are people who know it.
Netanyahu, who was on a 2-day working visit to the Netherlands, also compared Israel and his host country as small but great in spirit. Turning to the issue of peace talks, Netanyahu again invited Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to revive peace talks as soon as possible.
And it should be spoken clearly. A demilitarized Palestinian state that recognizes the Jewish state is the formula for peace. And I hope, for our sake, and for the sake of our Palestinian neighbors, for our children and their children, that the Palestinian Authority gets on with it, comes to the table, and negotiates a peace. They'll have their own positions, and I respect the fact that we can differ, but the only way we can resolve those differences is to sit down.
It is the first time in 15 years that an Israeli prime minister has visited the Netherlands, and the trip is seen as a reward for Dutch support for Israel. Later today, Netanyahu is scheduled to meet Dutch Queen Beatrix and attend a working lunch with his counterpart, Mark Rutte. Eli Wogelanter, IBA News.
And our reporter adds that Netanyahu today told journalists in Amsterdam that he denies news reports quoting him as saying that Israel's biggest enemies are the New York Times and the Haaretz newspapers. The Prime Minister was responding to the Jewish Telegraphic Agency report that quoted Jerusalem Post editor Steve Lindy as saying that Netanyahu made the dig at a private meeting a few weeks ago. Lindy told IBA News that JTA took his words out of context and that the remarks attributed to Netanyahu were not accurate.
Pakistan's Supreme Court postponed the trial of Prime Minister Yusuf Reza Gilani for charges of contempt of court and granted the government 2 weeks to prove that President Asif Ali Zardari should have immunity. This decision came after Gilani appeared before the court and insisted that the president's immunity deters the implementation of the National Reconciliation Decree. The judicial dispute may aggravate the political crisis in Pakistan. Our correspondent, Mayub Khudr, reports from Islamabad.
Armed with support from his partners in the coalition government, Prime Minister Yusuf Reza Gilani appears reassured and composed to defend himself before the Supreme Court. While Gilani tried to show amiability toward the court, he did not offer a straightforward apology.
This was an important day in Pakistan's history. The Prime Minister's appearance in court indicates the government's respect for the judiciary. We are not trying to create tension between the state institutions.
Gilani, accompanied by his attorneys, downplayed the gravity of the allegation. His only excuse for refusing to reopen the corruption cases against President Asif Ali Zardari is that the president has immunity. This appeal was rejected by the court, which granted the government only 2 weeks to submit an official petition to prove that Zardari has immunity.
So far, there have been a number of questions that need to be answered, the most important of which is about the president's immunity. Is it unconditional or conditional? I believe it is conditional because according to the Constitution, all citizens are equal before the law. If not, then it is discrimination and a violation of the Constitution.
So the president's immunity is the most important issue at the moment. While the court examines the case, the defense lawyers insist that Zardari should enjoy immunity inside and outside the country. There is no doubt that this dispute will burden Gilani's government and will put Zardari at risk of legal prosecution.
Prime Minister did not. It is obvious that the division is widening between the court and the government. Gilani's appearance in court is a lesson to all politicians.
The Supreme Court is examining the immunity status of the president and the Prime Minister. This complicated and thorny issue may prolong the political crisis until a verdict is issued. Mayub Khudr, Dubai TV, Islamabad.
Repercussions of the African continent's crisis cast a shadow on many tensions and conflicts. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, this may lead to a food crisis and famine on the continent. Ibrahim Al-Khali Karbal brings us the following report.
A food crisis is looming on the horizon of Africa's Sahel region. This according to a statement by the European Union's Humanitarian Aid Commissioner, predicting a food crisis over the coming months and adding that people will suffer if no action is taken. If this prediction is accurate, Africa's Sahel region will face the third crisis of this nature in just one decade. The 5 Sahel countries of Burkina Faso, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, and Chad are the most susceptible to the threat of major food shortages over the coming months. Oxfam International also warned of what it referred to as the United Nations' dangerous delay, as the first warning signs of the threat of famine in the Horn of Africa were visible in 2010. The organization said this delay leaves the region at risk of an acute drought that threatens the lives of 12 million people. Meanwhile, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees expressed growing concern about the lack of security in Somali refugee camps. There are nearly 1 million refugees scattered across the neighboring countries. The Commission is recording cases of a lack of security that hinder the work of relief agencies in the area. In addition, political unrest is negatively affecting food security, especially in raw, material-rich countries, such as oil-rich Nigeria and cocoa-rich Ivory Coast. UN experts believe unemployment and poverty are main problems in the continent due to the lack of diversification of value-added activities and qualified workers. The United Nations called on promoting development to reach their goal of reducing poverty.
News: a bomb explosion has targeted U.S. troops outside Kandahar airport. This was in the southern part of Afghanistan. Afghan officials say that blast has killed at least 6 Afghan civilians. But a spokesman for the Taliban, while claiming responsibility for the bombing, said a dozen American special forces and military advisors died in the incident. The Taliban spokesman also said, following the attack, foreign troops opened fire on Afghan civilians, killing 3 and wounding many more. There has been no let-up in attacks by militants despite freezing temperatures of the cold season across the country.
We'll start you off in the West Bank. Unlike most school children in the rest of the world, the school children in Azun Etma, a village in the east of the northern West Bank city of Ghalghalia, have to walk through a military checkpoint and metal wires and at the mercy of armed Israeli soldiers simply to get to school. Hannah Ghassis has filed us this report.
While attempting to film how school children, amongst all other Palestinians, are terrorized, searched and humiliated by Israeli occupation soldiers while crossing illegal Israeli gates and checkpoints set up inside of the West Bank, Israeli soldiers stationed at the southern gate of Azun al-Atma prohibited any filming within 500 meters of the gate, which they described as a closed military zone. After I asked the soldiers why a closed military zone is implemented in the middle of a Palestinian village, and why Palestinian children have no choice but to cross through a closed military zone in order to reach their schools, we were ordered to leave the premises. Although we were forced to leave, hundreds of Palestinians, including children, have had to cross through that gate at least 2 times a day in order to leave their neighborhood and to go back home.
They make us line up on the gate every day. The other day I was crossing the gate on my way home from school. A soldier emptied my school bag and dumped everything in the ground. The ground was all mud. He said that the bag needed a security check, but all I have was books, pens, pencils, and papers. What else would be in my bag?
Once the children cross the southern Azun military gate, they walk away from the soldiers to meet other students, some of whom had to cross through the Israeli military gate at the northern entrance of the town to reach the same school. The children still cannot avoid the Israeli occupation's presence, since the lands near the school were confiscated by the occupation to build a legal Israeli settlement, only several meters away from the Azun Atma Bet Amin school. The school children, who are too young to hold identification cards and need to cross the Israeli checkpoint and gate in southern Azun al-Atma, have to carry several documents with them in order for the soldiers stationed at the gate to let them pass. These documents include a copy of the child's birth certificate, a copy of one of their parents' identification card, as well as a copy of one of their parents' permission slip in order to cross. No Palestinian is allowed to pass through the gate without a particular permission slip issued by the Israeli occupation, which issues over 100 different permission slips for various purposes. And one of those purposes is to cross through the Azun Atma southern gate.
Last time I was coming to the school and I forgot my slip. So when I got to the gate, the soldier said that I cannot pass without my slip. I had to go home and get that permission slip. Then I went back to the gate with the slip. They let me pass and I came to school, but it was very late.
Experts believe that these school children who are severely affected by the brutal policies of the occupation are subjected to widespread forms of human rights violations which affect their psychological development and well-being, including their right to education. The psychological effect of the Israeli occupation and its policies on the children of Azun al-Atma and Beit Amin is evident in their schoolwork. Azun al-Atma is completely separated from the rest of the West Bank by two Israeli gates, one at the northern entrance of the village and the other at the southern part of the village. In addition to that, two illegal Israeli settlements, bypass roads and the apartheid wall, all built on village lands, act as barriers between Azun Atma and nearby Palestinian villages. The southern gate is closed by the occupation at 9 p.m. and opened at 7 a.m. Between those hours, Palestinians from the southern part of Azun al-Atma are prevented from entering or leaving their neighborhood by the Israeli occupation forces with no reason.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincoat Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic. Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories, world news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.